Okay, let's talk about fear for a second. So that's the facial expression of somebody who might be experiencing fear. Big eyes, mouth open, eyebrows peaked. Sometimes your mouth doesn't necessarily open, but the eyes being big is a big indicator because what it tells us is that the eyeballs, the receptors to the brain that are trying to intake everything, are trying to intake so much to make sense of what's happening that might be putting them in danger. So fear is often referred to as a sense of threat or danger being present, right? I mentioned that in the outset. So what are some other causes of fear? Rapid approach might be one of them. Heights might be another one. Historically dangerous objects. And that gets us into a conversation about belief systems and how beliefs can influence our emotions. So let's talk about a historical context of something that you may have experienced in your past that created pain or created injury. And the next time you see that thing, it can trigger a fear response. Now, that's totally natural and totally normal, and that's fine. What we want to do is be aware of it. Here's the interesting thing. The very anticipation of that scary thing can, in fact, create fear in your own brain and in your own psyche based on the memory of it. So if you've had a negative outcome with something or someone, and you start thinking about that thing in anticipation of encountering it or them again, what you may end up doing is triggering an anxiety. Now, here's the thing. That may not actually be happening right presently in your life. So what do you do about it? Well, pulling yourself into the present moment certainly helps so that you don't give yourself over to anxiety. The interesting thing about anxiety is that it can create panic attacks. So panic is a very unpleasant experience whereby our metabolic rate shoots up, our heart rate accelerates, breathing intensifies, and sometimes we get physiological symptoms like tightness in the chest or maybe like a floating head or even a headache sometimes. And I can tell you that anecdotally through my experience, almost everybody who complains about migraine headaches has an experience of chronic anxiety. Now, this can be of varying degrees, and it could be momentary and fleeting. It doesn't necessarily have to be like all day, every day, all of your life. But if you're carrying a large burden and you're mentally trying to wrestle through all the things that you have to deal with, that can absolutely create a physiological symptom, such as anxiety. Sometimes it manifests in the body in forms of things like ulcers or stomach aches or other body aches like fibromyalgia. The medical community is at a crossroads not knowing what to do about fibromyalgia. We can prescribe drugs to help treat it and diminish the symptoms, but we really don't know where it originates. I have a theory that it comes from anxiety and mentally carrying too much that's not yours to solve. But all that aside, the point is that we can learn to tolerate our fear so that we don't give over to these anxieties by acknowledging that we don't actually have control of future outcomes. And this all may seem very mystical and ethereal and whatnot, but think about it this way. If you go back to the emotional wave, beginning, middle, end of the emotion, right? So if you allow yourself to feel the experience of fear, whether or not it's real or perceived is immaterial. Acknowledging that you can let go of control and know that you can experience this fear and on the other side be okay, that'll allow you the freedom to logically, because you're self-validating, deal with whatever it is that's presenting itself. So if this thing that you're anticipating in the future actually does come true, you can logically advance yourself, deal with it, make plans, etc. So let's take retirement, for example. A lot of people, when they get into an advanced age, they're ending their careers, they're trying to decide whether or not they quote unquote retire to take their pension or their 401k draw. They're trying to do some financial analysis to see if they can continue paying their bills without their continued ongoing salary at the lower rate that their pension's probably going to pay. That's a very fear-provoking experience, and I'm not going to take that away from anybody. That's super scary to wonder whether or not you're going to be able to pay your bills, right? So the point is, we still have this thing that is yet to occur called retirement, but today we're planning for it. Now, if we can go, oh man, I'm really scared about this. I don't know the future. I can't predict it, and I can't reasonably wrap my arms around it and wrestle it to the ground because it's not here yet. That's fine. Simply acknowledging that you don't have control of the future and all you can do is plan the best that you can with the information you have at the time can be very liberating. Because then you go, well, I have X amount of dollars coming in. I have X in my bank account. I may need to supplement with a part-time job, or I may need to downsize or scale down my home or whatever it is. Make adjustments in your life. Now we're in a logic frame of mind to deal with the threat. It's a very real threat. Just the same as if you're hiking through the woods and a snake crosses your path. The first thing you're going to feel is surprise. Boom. You're like, whoa, I didn't expect that there because I was just hiking along through the woods. And then you can step back. And if you've trained yourself well enough to tolerate the fear and ride through that disequilibrium, that discomfort of losing control and going, I don't have control over this fear about whether or not I feel it, but I can control how much and how long I feel it. Then we go, whew, all right, the snake's 8 feet away from me. I know it's only a 3-foot snake. It can't jump that far. Now I get to analyze logically whether or not the snake is a threat to me. I can survey my surroundings, decide to go around it, maybe throw a rock at it and hope it goes away. I don't know that I'd advise that. But either way, if you're paralyzed by fear in that fight, flight, or sometimes people say freeze because we freeze in that moment, you're not able to do anything about the thing that's provoking the fear, including retirement or whatever's out there. So we want to be able to tolerate and acknowledge our fear and move through it. Things are super scary in life, especially if we don't have control over them. One of the provoking things about that generates fear is mystery. So being able to embrace mystery and know that you're going to be okay, not knowing the outcome, is crucial to being able to tolerate things that you have yet to discover. And this goes for cultures that you don't understand, life experiences that haven't happened yet, or maybe that anticipated disaster that may befall you someday. If you can convince yourself that you have the tools and you're well equipped to deal with that when and if it comes, and not now when it isn't happening, then you can deal with it when it does come. The problem is, a lot of us are raised to shove down our fear. And I mentioned this in the very beginning. Males, especially in America, are told you're not allowed to be scared. Fear is not something to be tolerated, right? So what we end up doing is we inadvertently train our young boys and girls to avoid fear. And what do we grab instead? Probably something like anger. So if we get scared in the road rage incident, for example, in the anger video that I recorded, you may reach for anger, and it acts as a proxy to cover over the fear, but you haven't actually addressed the fear. And then what do? You end up actually just skipping over the fear again, which trains your brain that fear is to be avoided. You do that long enough, you just don't tolerate fear at all, and you end up reaching for anger or contempt or something else. Back to panic disorders. The way we get into panic disorders is we end up creating a stacking effect where we've decided in our minds that the very experience of fear is so terrifying that we can't experience it. So we end up going, there's this scary thing, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with the fear, therefore I'm afraid of being afraid. And before you know it, we have physiological ailments that cripple us in the moment. We end up passing out, freezing, curling up in a ball and bursting into tears on the couch, some of which I've actually experienced myself. And that's okay. But here's the antidote. The antidote is simply to acknowledge, wow, this is happening to me. I feel my chest tightening. I feel my head kind of constricting. The walls are closing in. What am I scared of right now? And what can I do about it? That takes us from limbic mode here in the middle brain and pulls us into frontal lobe logic to address whatever it is that we have to do. Some things that aren't on the list of the 10 concrete emotions or core emotions are overwhelmed, frustrated, love, jealousy, envy. They're hybrids of emotion or hybrids of emotion and thought. Overwhelmed is one of those experiences that we say, I feel overwhelmed. Well, the problem is that's different for everybody. Not everybody's overwhelmed is going to be the same as somebody else's overwhelmed. But it does have its roots in fear. Fear of what? Not being able to accomplish what you're being asked. And that's fine. We all experience this from time to time. So what we want to do is itemize our priorities. You can't have multiple number one priorities all at the same time. You can only have one. And in that moment, that's all you can do. Right now, I can tell you as I'm filming this video, I've got a meeting coming up in a few minutes. I've got tons of work still to do. But the only important priority right now is recording this video. I have to be present for that. Later, I can deal with all the other stuff, but not right now. So being able to pull yourself in the present moment and itemize all your priorities, 1 through however many, is critical to tolerating fear so that you don't give yourself over to anxiety and then panic disorders. And then even if they get really, really bad, you can end up with some pretty negative outcomes like drinking too much or full-blown psychosis. Here's an interesting thing too that people find fascinating when I share it with them. A lot of times people who are struggling with depression are not actually depressed about something sad. They're actually experiencing massive anxiety that's then bled over into a sense of giving up. And it's experience of saying, I'm so overwhelmed, I might as well quit. And so then they end up walking through life for some period of time that looks like depression. It looks like they've given up on interesting or pleasurable activities. It looks like they're down in the dumps and want to close themselves in and, drop the blinds and huddle under a blanket. It looks like depression, but what begot the depression was anxiety. So it's really important, if you're a clinician watching this, to screen appropriately to see if the person has a ton of stuff on their plate, if they're carrying psychological distresses of yesteryear or generational pressures or whatever, so that we can get underneath the outward depressive symptoms and say, actually, man, you know what? You're worried about stuff. And amazingly, every time I have this conversation, people go, wow, nobody's ever talked to me like that. You're right. I am worried about all these things. I'm not actually depressed. I just realized I got so overwhelmed that I quit. And that's really, really scary, because if we misdiagnose, we can actually misprescribe. And when we're giving prescription medications to treat depression, when really the underlying problem is anxiety, we can exacerbate the anxiety. So if you're struggling with anxiety, or you're a clinician who's dealing with somebody who's chronically depressed, but they've got all this stuff going on in their lives, and it seems like, yeah, I'd be depressed too if I had all that going on, switch your questioning around and ask about anxiety-provoking events. Chances are pretty good that you're going to find fear at the root of it. And if you can address the fear, talk about embracing mystery, talk about letting go, teach non-attachment, and teach fear tolerance, you're going to cure the depression. Thanks for listening. As always, share this around if you could, please, and subscribe if you would. We wish you all great mental wellness.